Hi there. Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the Carroll School Parent and Fans of Carroll Speaker Series we host periodically, usually every month or so. It is our great honor tonight to have a guest speaker, Dr. Sharon Saline. Dr. Saline is a world-renowned expert in ADHD. She specializes in working with kids, families, and young adults who have ADHD, learning disabilities, and mental health challenges. She's also authored several books that you can see here on this screen. She teaches at Smith School for Social Work, and she's a regular contributor to Attitude Magazine, Psychology Today, and also works on TV. It is our great pleasure to have her here today. Sharon, I'm just going to ask you to flip the slide. Our agenda for tonight is Sharon's going to help us understand ADHD at a deeper level. She's going to talk to us about executive functioning skills and the intersection between ADHD and executive function. She's going to lay out a framework for us that she calls the 5 C's of ADHD. We're going to learn some strategies for improving executive functioning and how motivation factors in. And we'll kind of touch upon the topics of anxiety and improving resilience in our students and kids. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Sharon Saline.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to get started because I have a lot to share. And I want to make sure that we have time for adequate questions and conversation. I've opened the chat, but it's not I can't exactly see the chat since I'm not running this Zoom. But if you could open the chat so that I can make comments for everyone. Right now, it looks like I can just make comments to the hosts and the panelists. So if you could help me either make me a co-host so that I can make comments to everyone, that would be great.
We'll take care of that. And also, if you have questions for Dr. Saline, if you don't mind putting them in the Q&A, we'll use the chat just to have some conversation with Dr. Saline, but we'll use the Q&A feature if you don't mind to field questions and so forth. Dr. Saline's going to leave a little time at the end for parent questions. We're going to try to address a lot of things in the context of the presentation. If there's anything we miss, we promise to get back to you on email later.
Okay, so let's start with our first poll. If you would go ahead and launch that poll, that would be great. And our first poll is, does your child have attentional challenges? And that's kind of lets us know who's here. So yes, with a diagnosis, yes, without a diagnosis, no, but wondering about it, and no. So let's see who we've got here. Thank you for joining. I believe that the slides will be available for people. Again, I can now post to everyone. So I'm just going to post in the chat that I have a free gift for all of you. It's a downloadable and it summarizes what I'm talking about today and executive functioning skills. So you'll have something to take home right away. And it's a way for us to also stay connected. You put your email address in and get a blog twice a month, and I don't share anything with anybody. So let's try to get a sense of, the answers to this poll. Can you show me the answers, please?
Yeah, so it looks like we have about 75% of the audience has yes with a diagnosis, 14% yes without a diagnosis. And it looks like about 10, 11% are no or no but wondering about it.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Stacy and I are going to have a tag team. So I have to admit that I'm going to follow your lead, Stacy, in the tag team department. So do you want to get started or do you want me to get started?
Thank you so much. I'd love for you to help us understand ADHD at a deeper level.
So let's start by thinking about who are kids with ADHD. And I'm going to have a few slides about this. So does this sound familiar to any of you? Kara, age 15, says, I'm good with, Anya, age 11, says, I'm good with my imagination. Sometimes I think of something, then I think of something else, and then I'm way away from that first thing. Not being able to focus when you want to, says Tyrone, age 14. Really, I get distracted easily. People talking, one. looking at something. I would just daydream off into it. Like if I see it start snowing, I'll just look at the snow, just something that catches my attention. And Layla, age 12, says, I haven't been succeeding at school and life, and I expect myself to succeed. I worry all the time about stuff. It's a constant state of my head being just above the water. So let's get some facts about ADHD. So we know that ADHD is a biologically based chronic condition that is marked by persistent inattention, hyperactivity, and sometimes impulsivity that is more frequent and severe than is typically observed in children of the same age. It's a novelty-seeking brain. Interest fosters motivation. These are creative, outside-the-box thinkers. And we know that ADHD is a performance-based condition that relies on executive functioning skill deficits. And there are three types: hyperactive, hyperactive impulsive, inattentive, and combination type. About 10% of students in the United States are affected by having ADHD, and actually 64% of children ages 4 to 17 have received an ADHD diagnosis at some point. There's some question about whether kids outgrow ADHD or they actually learn how to live with it and manage their executive functions over time. But we can expect that the brain develops a little bit more slowly in kids with ADHD, and that has to do with the connectivity of the prefrontal cortex to the rest of the brain. And there's usually a delay of up to about 3 years. About approximately 55% of adults with ADHD have at least one child with ADHD. And if one child in a family has ADHD, then there's a 33% chance a second child will have it. Often these parents report more stress than other parents. And in order to receive a diagnosis of ADHD, you have to have 6 out of 9 symptoms in 2 areas of functioning for more than 6 months before the age of 12. Over the age of 17, it's 5 out of 9 symptoms. Now, there is a whole team that's now studying new guidelines for the diagnosis of ADHD in people over the age of 12, because there are many people who do not receive a diagnosis of ADHD before the age of 12 and may not manifest symptoms. And so we are trying to come up with a description, a set of diagnostic categories that meets who people really are. The fastest growing population of diagnosis right now are adults with ADHD. And in order to get an ADHD diagnosis, we want to rule out other medical, mental health, environmental, or traumatic issues. There is a central mystery to ADHD that I think is really important for us to talk about. And that is that, according to Dr. Thomas Brown, everybody with ADHD tends to have a few specific activities for which they have no difficulty in deploying their executive functioning skills, which might be problematic for them in almost any other task they undertake. So what this means is that a strong personal interest in something or a belief that something bad will happen immediately if the task isn't completed can be motivating. In fact, inconsistency in motivation is one of the most confusing aspects of living with ADHD, and it causes anxiety. It's anxiety provoking for our kids and for those of us who live and work with them.
So I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about executive functioning, and good, and you queued up the slide, read my mind. Thank you so much. And the intersection between ADHD, because we often see these two things riding sidecar.
Exactly. So everybody with ADHD has significant executive functioning challenges. And when I say significant, I mean that those challenges are more severe and more frequent than we would see in peers of the same age or developmental level. Executive functioning skills are the command center of the brain that's right here behind our prefrontal cortex. They connect, prioritize, and cognitive functions moment by moment. It's a term used to describe the directive capacities of the brain. So instead of having one conductor for a large orchestra, executive functions have several conductors. We have the conductor for the wind section. We have the conductor for the string section, the percussion section, and all of these conductors are at the front, coming together, working together to create beautiful music. So executive functions are responsible for self-regulation. When we're tired, when we're stressed, our weakest executive functioning skills are hit first. And we see executive functioning skills in all kinds of neurodivergent students, students who are twice exceptional, students who have learning disabilities, and students who fall into what we call level 1 autism, which formerly was Asperger's. The more severe the executive functioning skill deficits are, the higher the likelihood there is of a learning disability. And there are different types of skills. Cool skills, which are more unconscious and have to do with thinking. So things like energy, recall, focus, self-evaluation, and hot skills, the ones that we use consciously in our daily lives, and they tend to be related to guiding behavior, inhibition, emotion, and action. And school uses all of these executive functioning skills, often simultaneously. Of course, there's a diagnostic overlap that is really worth talking about, which is that ADHD rarely travels alone. And I think this is important for us to think about because we tend to think about kids with ADHD that, you know, it's one thing and then it doesn't have other things. It always brings along friends. Those friends could be learning disabilities. 70% of kids with ADHD have a learning disability. It could be twice exceptionality. 9.1% of kids who are twice exceptional also have a learning disability. And about 5% of kids who are twice, we see a lot of twice exceptionality, 5% in the general population, but a lot of overlap with ADHD. And those are kids who maybe if your child has had a psychoeducational evaluation would, you know, score very high on verbal comprehension or visual spatial factors, but lower on working memory or processing speed or fluid reasoning. And so that there's this internal kind of discrepancy about how things are, how things play out for them. And there's a higher level of frustration. We also know that a learning disability is a neurological condition just like ADHD, and that for many kids with ADHD who take medication, it improves their ability to process information and absorb information and access things from working memory more efficiently.
Sharon, I had a question for you. I saw a parent question about ADHD, executive function, and the impact of trauma, and whether that's sort of light trauma or severe trauma. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I was going to talk about that a little bit later, but I'm happy to talk about that now. So, you know, there is a difference between trauma and ADHD, although some research has shown that, particularly research out of Russian orphanages, that kids who've grown up in neglectful situations, some aspects of their brain development resemble kids who have ADHD, and that has to do with certain smaller organs in the brain, the corpus callosum, the central highway of the brain that connects the left and right hemisphere. That can be smaller in people with trauma and ADHD, and that affects sequencing and the integration of details. Sometimes the amygdala, that fight, flight, or fight organ can be smaller. Sometimes the hippocampus that's responsible for memory might be smaller. And this part of the brain that has to do with that links to emotional control can also be smaller. So, and in in some cases with kids who are twice exceptional, some of those are larger. So it all sort of varies. But we do know that trauma affects the brain, and it affects the kind of reactivity that we'll see a lot with kids with ADHD. And when we're differentiating between trauma and ADHD, one of the things that we want to ask is, what has happened in a child's life that is leading them to act this way? Was it a single incident trauma? Was it chronic trauma? Is it what we consider complex trauma? And this is what I see a lot with our outside the box thinkers, is a kind of complex trauma. So it's not just one thing happened at one time, but that things have happened over time, particularly related to educational trauma or racism or homophobia, or kind of criticism and teasing for being neurodivergent, bullying, and things like that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but if you're ready, love to talk about, you spoke to our faculty and staff about your 5C approach. And I think we all benefit from these frameworks. They're very easy to remember and very easy for us to put into action.
I'm happy to do that. I do want to say something about the last slide, which is anxiety travels with ADHD about 34% of the time. Depression around 16 to 30%. And we see behavioral issues such as oppositional defiant disorder more around 50% of the time, ODD in particular around 40%. And I do want to say that I have my own set of doubts around oppositional defiant disorder as a diagnostic category, because there are always areas where kids who are oppositional in some ways are fine. They get along with people. They're thriving. And so the question is kind of what's happening around them that's making it harder for them to succeed. And with the ODD diagnosis, it's kind of like you're blaming the victim. I do want to also say that, anxiety, travels in families. There's a predisposition for it versus depression where there's a genetic susceptibility. So let's talk a little bit about my 5C's approach. So this is a win-win scenario because we're offering choices and we're negotiating collaborative solutions. And this means your frustration level will go down and their sense of competency will increase. So it's a foundation of strength-based thinking and attentive awareness to strategize solutions to common challenges for families living with executive functioning issues. So the first C is self-control. We, the adults, we're going to manage ourselves first so we can act effectively and teach our kids to do the same. It's like the oxygen mask on a plane. We have to manage our own triggers so that we can be present for and assist our children, because if the steam is coming out of our ears, we're certainly not going to be able to attend to them in a helpful manner. Compassion. This means meeting kids where they are, not where you think they should be. And it lies at the heart of positive adult-child alliances. And we're also talking about self-compassion. Many parents of kids who are neurodivergent are highly self-critical about what they're not doing right and how they're, not doing enough, or there's all kinds of ways in which people can be self-critical. And it's important that when you're parenting a child who is neurodivergent, that you're kind to yourself as well as showing up for them. Collaboration is working together for solutions in ways that include negotiation and compromise, because punishment has been found repeatedly not to work. This doesn't mean that we are avoiding consequences. Absolutely not. We're interested in natural and logical consequences. But we want to use incentives so that when we listen to the ideas of what our kids have about a certain challenge or problem that's happening in their lives or in the family, and we respect their input, we're including them, we're increasing their buy-in because they're participating. We're not letting them run the show, we're still the parent, but we're incorporating something that matters to them into the solutions that we're creating. And it helps them feel empowered and connected, and then they want to participate more. Consistency is sticking with a plan more often than not, allowing for exceptions and not focusing on perfection, but rather focusing on steadiness. And this fosters that essential cause and effect learning that nurtures resilience. We're relying on efforting. So efforting is different than trying. Trying is kind of a toss out. For these kids, there's no tossing out. It's a whole body experience. It's cognition, it's emotional regulation, it's physical management. That's what efforting is about. And these are kids for whom predictability is comforting. Routines build those all-important executive functioning skills that these kids really need. And lastly, the final C is celebration. This is noticing and acknowledging what's working by continuously offering words and actions of encouragement, praise, and validation. This is not baking a cake because your child decided to clear their plate from the table. Instead, we are noticing the ways in which they are efforting. When they do clear their plate, we give them a high five and say, way to go. This is to counteract the negativity bias in their brain. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson and her colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania, along with Martin Seligman, have done a lot of research on positivity and happiness. And what Dr. Fredrickson found is that the ideal positivity ratio are 3 positives for every negative. Now, I'd like you to put in the chat what you think the ratio is for your child each day. For every 1 positive thing they say, how many negative things do you think they hear or tell themselves? I'm looking for the total number. So, if they hear 5 and they tell themselves 10, then the ratio would be 1 to 15. Let's think about that for a minute and let's put that in the chat, because I think we're sometimes not aware of the intensity of the negativity that our kids are saying to themselves.
Sharon, can you see the chat, or you want me to read out?
Yes, I can see the chat. Yes. All right. So I'm going to continue talking a little bit about different executive functioning skills and how to improve them. So when we think about improving executive functioning skills, we want to start with working memory. And working memory is a kind of unconscious skill. We're not aware that we're not remembering something until suddenly we know we can't recall it. And this is frustrating for kids, and it's frustrating for adults. So there are a couple of steps that I want to use to help you build working memory. Now, working memory is assisted by medication because it is unconscious, and the medications can help facilitate connections at the synaptic level. But we can also, and we must, do interventions for these kids. And so we're going to write things down. Instead of you being a reminder machine, you're going to have a little list of some things that you do each morning to get ready for school, and you're going to point them to that list. And that could be pictures, it could be words, but you're going to say, check the list, check the list. One parent I worked with at the beginning of the school year would take a picture of her daughter with her coat on and her lunchbox and her backpack, and then she would print it out and laminate it and put it on the refrigerator and write, do you look like this? If so, meet me at the door. And instead of saying, do you have your backpack? Do you have your coat? Another thing that we can do to help jog working memory is to take a list of what needs to go in the backpack, laminate it, pin it to the back of the backpack so kids see the cue instead of having to remember it from the list that's over here on the bulletin board, or asking you and trying to hold it in their auditory memory, which is often hard for kids with ADHD. So we want to use these tools so that they'll learn how to use these tools over time. We want to give them directions for one thing at a time. Why? Because these are kids for whom complicated directions are complicated. So if you say, I'd like you to go to the bathroom and get your backpack, meet me in the car, your child may only make it to the bathroom. And oh my God, those bubbles at the water, washing my hands, they feel so good. I'm just having a great time. I forgot about everything else, right? And we want to use the rule of three with directions. And the way the rule of three works is that we make eye contact with our child. And sometimes kids don't like eye contact or it's uncomfortable. That's fine. They can look right here at your hairline. And you state a direction. I would like you to use the bathroom. What would I like you to do? Use the bathroom. What it is that I'm asking you to do? Use the bathroom. So the first time is just rote memory. It's short term, comes right out. But the second time, it starts to make the transfer into that computational space of the brain, that working memory. And this is what we want to nourish. So I'm going to go back because I didn't want to go back to see some of these ratios that you all put up. 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 15, 20. 20 is about average was what I hear. 1 to 10, 20%, possibly. I have no idea. I try to be positive at home. I don't know what he hears at school. Well, if he's going to the Carroll school, it's mostly positive, we hope. And I think so, because I've had some great trainings with your staff. Your faculty. Louise says, what if your kid is resistant to lists? So, what is that resistance about? I don't want to do what you tell me. I don't want to follow the rules. Lists don't help. Actually, I've now been in this field for long enough that I can say that I've talked to pretty much every leader in the field. Ed Hallowell, Peg Dawson, Russell Barkley, everybody. You need to make a list. And so have your child involved in the list. Perhaps the list is too long and it's overwhelming. They're annoyed by lists, but it means that if using the list means that you're not yelling, that you're not arguing, then that's a win for them. And you might want to incentivize it. When we use the list and there's no argument in the morning, you can have 15 minutes of extra screen time after school. So we incentivize them. Working memory is also fundamentally related to emotional control. And that's because the way working memory functions is that we attach emotion or value to something, and that's how we remember it. And so what happens with working memory is if you're in a situation and someone's yelling at you, your working memory is struggling to pull up from the past. What am I supposed to do in this situation? Because what I really want to do right now is just yell back, but I think I'm supposed to do something, but I can't get there because I'm flooded, because it's just a weaker tool. So what we want to do then is to plan and predict for triggers in short family meetings. So we're going to use my Stop, Think, Act, Recover plan. So this is how we're going to do it. In a calm moment, after a blow up, together sit down and name something that sets each person off, okay? Talk about and ask questions about the body-based signals that things are escalating. Your voice is getting louder. Your face is getting red. I see that you're clenching your fists. These are signs that a blow-up is on the way and we need to call a stop. Now, a stop is not a timeout because no one's in trouble. A stop is a pause. And it can be a time apart if that's what serves your child. And it might be a time with you, which is the hardest because you really want that time apart so you can resettle, but your child wants to sit next to you on the sofa and have you read them a story to help them settle down. I'm not big on calm down. I don't know about you, but when my husband tells me to calm down, I pretty much want to drop kick him to my neighbor's house. But if he says, I'd like you to slow down or settle down, that's a little bit easier for me to stomach. So we call a stop. We're using body signals to let us know that your child's becoming dysregulated. Maybe you're being dysregulated. And then we're going to have a list of soothers, soothing activities, things that help you slow down. It takes nanoseconds for the amygdala to be triggered and to set the body off in a fight, flight, or freeze reaction. And while the brain starts to group fast, like within maybe 90 seconds to 2 minutes. The body actually takes about 20 minutes. So we have to have some time, some activities to help the body slow down and settle. And what is that going to be? Some of my clients have gone to the dollar store and they buy a box and they fill it with calm me down activities, puzzles, coloring books, Play-Doh, and that box comes down, and that's what's used for 5 anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes, depending on your child, to settle. Some kids like to just hang out with their puppy, with their dog or their cat. Older kids might want to go in their room and listen to music if that's an option. One of my clients liked to get under her bed because she had one of those tall beds and she had a flashlight there and a book and she would read. So we want to figure out what is the soother. Then so we're taking the pause, we're using the soother, then we're doing the think. And the think is when we come back together and we talk about what is the next right thing for us to do to move forward. The think is not an assessment of what you did wrong. The think is not a time for teaching. It is simply, what are we going to do to move forward? What's the next right action? And then act is doing it. Very simple. And then we're going to do some recovery. We're going to take some time. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 3 hours. Then you can circle back and say, I'm wondering how the next time we might be able to do it differently. And that might be the next day. That might be at the family meeting 2 days later. It might be that evening, but we're not going to push that because the learning can only happen once the mind and the body are settled and clear and have moved forward. So we're going to talk about a situation calmly afterwards. When the recovery is over, asking open-ended questions, stating what you've observed, saying, tell me more about your experience, avoiding blame and analysis. I hear, I noticed, tell me more, I'm listening.
Sharon, can you
Any
talk just for a moment?
questions about
Yeah,
that?
I wonder if you could just go a little bit deeper about these questions versus analysis about here's what I notice, here's what I see versus the analytical side. I think that's really useful for our parents.
Any sentence that starts with you is not a sentence you want. I wish you wouldn't. It doesn't work when you. I don't like it when. I'm curious about. I heard you say blah, blah, blah. I noticed this. Can you say more about how your feelings were hurt? These are the kinds of questions, these are openers, right? How, what, when, where? Why is not one of those questions? What's the answer you're going to get if you ask why, Stacy?
What is the answer?
I don't know. That's the answer. Why did you do that? I don't know. Why this? I don't know. Or blaming. So we want to stay away from that.
Thank you. So I guess now, actually, I'm really interested to hear much more too about motivation. And we were talking a little bit about incentives, about the kind of extra screen time. If you put that list on your backpack, if you use the list, I think our parents would love to know more about those strategies.
Fantastic. So motivation is linked to several executive functioning skills. And it's composed of, why we do something is composed of initiation, getting started on something, often without direction and excessive reminding. You're motivated to begin a task. Time management, doing things on time and meeting deadlines, correctly estimating how long something will take, avoiding procrastination. Organization and prioritizing. Where's your stuff? How do you keep track of it? How do you decide what's most pressing to do? Sustained attention, managing your attention and resisting distractions when faced with a task. Goal-oriented persistence, setting a goal, staying focused on it, and returning to the task after an interruption. And focus, the spotlight of your attention. I like to put my hand here and I'll ask people, even teenagers, will roll their eyes at me. Where is the focus of your attention? Where is the spotlight of your attention? Because focus is a dynamic process of choosing what is critical to notice or recall. And we improve focus by noticing where it is. Most people with ADHD, kids and adults, notice when they return from drifting off. We want to teach them how to cope when they return. Oops, excuse me. So one of the things that's a real challenge is motivating kids with ADHD to do the tough stuff, because it's that inconsistency with motivation that's confusing. And also because when things are boring, it's harder to work up excitement for them. So there are two neurotransmitters that are involved in having ADHD: dopamine, which has to do with interest, pleasure and motivation, rewards, as well, and norepinephrine, which has to do with sleep and alertness in the cerebellum. And these neurotransmitters are, all over the brain in those dopamine and norepinephrine pathways, and in the pathways that often have to do with the executive functioning skills that we talked about earlier. So interest stimulates motivation, and there are two types: extrinsic, something that's outside of you, a request or a reward or responsibility that depends on achieving a goal. You turn in your permission form for the field trip by Friday so you can go on Monday. Intrinsic motivation means striving towards a goal for personal satisfaction or accomplishment. You decide you want to run 3 miles instead of 2. You want to make the next level on a computer game. When a task is fundamentally unrewarding or uninteresting for any of us, whether it's homework, doing the dishes, cleaning the litter box, there's naturally less excitement. There's naturally lower amounts of dopamine in our brains. It takes all of us longer to get going. But for kids with ADHD or adults with ADHD who already have lower amounts of dopamine, they're now at a double dopamine disadvantage, right? Because there's a naturally lower amount because it's not that interesting. And now they already have a lower amount. So it's even harder for them to work up interest about something that's not so compelling. When there's no clear immediate satisfaction or benefit from the task, these are kids who are going to struggle with it. And so the external incentive or the reward encourages them until the satisfaction of doing it, that internal reward, kicks in. And that's in the late teens or early 20s that it kicks in consistently. So this means that we want to teach our kids to put the have-tos before the want-tos. I was recently at a school doing a talk with parents, and one mother says, well, I let my kids come home and they have snack and they can do some screens, and then it's really just a bear to get them to do their homework. And I said, well, why do you think that is? She said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, you're giving them their want to before the have to. Why would they do the have to? There's no reason. So we want to switch that, right? So they can come home, have snack, do their have to, and then they can earn their want to. And she said, oh, I guess that's true. I do that. And then she gave an example of how she does it in her own life. So the thing that I would really want to say to you is that when kids are unmotivated, they often expect failure, which leads them to not try. So they've given up on themselves, either because they've received a message from adults that adults have given up on them, or they've received a message from adults that adults can't help them, so there's something fundamentally flawed about them, or they've had a lot of educational trauma and they don't believe in their ability to succeed anymore. So we're going to start small when we think about motivation. We're looking for small wins.
Dr. Saline, can I ask you a question? You mentioned kind of intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation, and there's some schools of thought around teaching kids to have intrinsic motivation, and that the incentive somehow may misalign or misguide those. What are your thoughts on that?
Those children do not have ADHD. And I was talking to a family recently where they said, we have one child with ADHD and one without. What are we supposed to do? And I said, use the extrinsic rewards. Because even as an adult, I have sometimes I have to eat the frog first, right? I have to do the thing I don't like to get to the thing I want to do. So I cook dinner and I have to do the dishes, even though I would really rather, like, pull out my fingernails because I'm so tired and I just want to watch, my show. But I'm going to do the dishes because I, Sharon, do not want to wake up to those dishes in the morning. Some people like to wake up to dishes in the morning. It's how they organize their day. I'm just not one of them. So when we're talking about using incentives, what we want to talk about are meaningful incentives, because punishments don't teach skills. So meaningful incentives come through collaboration. Often incentives don't work because parents don't collaborate with their kids about them. And so what does your child love to do? No activity is too unimportant to consider. Screen time is not an entitlement; it's a privilege. And I think that many of our generation have confused screen time as a right, and really it's something that you get to earn. And for school, it's mandatory, but in other ways, it's something that's earned. So we want to teach the difference between how to create incentives based on things they want to do. And time with you can be an incentive. Playing cards, maybe watching a special show, doing a puzzle, shooting hoops, whatever it is, time with you can be an incentive. Reading a story, um, playing music. These are all privilege. These are all incentives, including, maybe going out for a special ice cream or something like that. So we want to really focus on their efforts. And we also want to remember that there are logical consequences for things and natural consequences. If you go outside and it's 30 degrees and you're not wearing a coat, you're going to be cold. But if you drive my car when I tell you not to, when I'm going to visit my mother for the day, and you hit a stop sign, you're going to be sitting with me while I call the repairs. You're going to be going with me to get an estimate for the repair. You're going to contribute to that repair. And then, oh, by the way, you won't be driving alone in the car for a while because I'm not sure you've earned that privilege. Okay. So we're not renegotiating the terms of any agreements that we make under pressure. And we are creating non-cooperation clauses. So this is the agreement that we have. And if at the time you're not you can't do the agreement, then this is what's going to kick into play. So let's just sort of speed through some of these other incentives, because I see there are other issues related to motivation. There's lots of questions. Initiation, getting started. So we want to work with their innate desire for mastery, independence. That's what maturation is all about. I'm growing up. I want to be able to do things on my own. Want to break things down into micro steps. If it's too big, and they can't start it. If someone can't start something, then it's too big, it's too hard. We want to check in on their progress, and we want to think about something that's playful, that's interesting, that's novel, where they have a commitment and something that makes them happy. It's called pinch, and people have different things that they say for it, but play, interest, novelty, commitment, and happiness all encourage people to do things that they need to do. Of course, we want to build what's called self-regulation and metacognition, and this asks us questions, which is, how am I doing? What's helped me before that could apply to this situation? And we want to stay away from good and bad dichotomies as much as possible, and instead use what's working and what's not working. We want to help our kids think about the sensations that they're having that might let them know that they're getting upset. We want to help our kids understand the effect of what they're saying on other people. When I say these words, how does my sister look? And we want to start to really nurture that working memory by saying, what has helped me before that I could apply to this situation? And we are going to help our kids do that. um, by holding on to those memories. Do you have a question, Stacy? I can't hear you.
Should we go ahead with the 5 Cs, do some of these strategies in your home and then go to parent questions? Do you want parent questions now? What's your preference?
Let's do some strategies. So I want to say a few more things about motivation that I didn't really get to touch on. So first of all, time, we don't have enough time to cover everything today, and I'm actually going to be spending a little more time talking about anxiety. But I want to say that time management is very teachable. And one of the things that helps kids learn about time is analog clocks, time timers. Kids need to see time move, and they need help learning how to estimate how long something will take. People with ADHD are chronically time blind. They don't necessarily feel time. And so showing, the hands of a clock and seeing that they're moving helps them understand that time is something that is fluid. In terms of organization and prioritizing, we want to help our kids understand where things live. Everything has to have a place. Your gloves go here, your socks go here. This helps them organize themselves. We want to organize things, electronically in terms of tabs and folders, but also organize things, physically, whether it's by color or number or alphabetically, so that there's a system and that the system makes sense to their brain. And that's what we call a self-smart system of organization. We also want to think about how to help our kids sustain attention and focus. So ask yourself, how long can your child actually concentrate before they need a break? That's their work period. Think for yourself for a minute. What order do you like to do things in? Do you like to do something hard first, eat that frog and get it over with? Do you like to do something easy first and get on a roll and then do the harder thing? What things are easy, hard, or medium? Why don't you put in the chat which way you like to go? Hard, medium, easy, easy, medium, hard. And then I want you to set a reminder to have a conversation with your kids about what is hard, medium, and easy, and which order they like to work. That will help sustain them. So they have a block of time where they work, preferably family work time where you're all at the kitchen table doing something so you can see if they're actually on YouTube or they're doing their social studies project. And then having like a body break for 5 minutes, working for 5 minutes and having a 1-minute body break and doing another 5 minutes and then another body break, another 5 minutes, and maybe you're finished. Setting up times together. Okay. So I see a lot of hard, medium, easies, a few hard, medium, and easies, and two medium, hard, easies. Anybody else? And then finally, I want to say something about goals. So setting goals is something that you want to do collaboratively, because if you have a goal and your child does not have a goal, there's not going to be a lot of success in whatever it is you're trying to do. So we want them to be part of the goal setting process. Let's talk about putting the 5 C's into action in your house. So the first thing that we want to do is identify things that trigger you. Because when you're feeling disturbed and you're off, they are going to be more agitated. Kids have told me over and over again that it's much harder for them to hold on to themselves in the presence of their parents' dysregulation. And dysregulation is something that happens to all of us as parents. So what kinds of signs do you have? And let's put it in the chat. What are some signs, physiological signs that you're getting activated? So Marguerite, you said their whining sets you off. So that can go in the chat too. What is something that they do that sets you off? But what's a sign that you are starting to get activated? Because when you're activated, you need a time apart. And my favorite time apart for parents is to go to the bathroom. You can go to the bathroom and close the door and wash your hands, look at yourself in the mirror and say, I can't wait till this is over, or this is really hard, or what did I do last time? What did Dr. Sharon say? But you're taking a pause for yourself. And so that you can then come out on the other side of the bathroom door where there may be chaos, but that's okay because you've navigated your own stress. Let's see, we have whining, constant questioning. Shaylee, you go to bed. I start feeling hot. It's exhausting. Hypertension. So you're feeling tired. You start feeling hot. Your blood pressure is rising. These are all signs for you that you need a time apart right away. Get a glass of water, step outside in the 30-degree weather and take a couple deep breaths, maybe do some alternate nostril breathing from yoga, go to the bathroom, pull whatever resources you can so that you can slow down. If you have a partner that you can tag team and say, I need 5, please take care of this, great. If you don't, do what you know is going to help soothe you. Pick one behavior that you would like to change in your family with your child. So, your middle schooler might say, I want you to stop nagging me about my homework and whether I turned it in. And you might say, I want to stop nagging you about your homework and whether you turned in. That's a great thing. Let's work on that. Let's come up with a system so there's no nagging. What's that going to look like? So you're collaborating now on an issue that matters to both of you. It's two sides of the same coin. And you're supporting their efforts. What types of redirection are you going to give them that's not going to feel critical to them? So what kind of cues? And we want to talk about the cueing that's going to occur, because if you say X, that might set them off. But if you agree that you can say Y, then that's what they've agreed to. Maybe write that down on a Post-it and put it on your fridge. Remember that in order to aim for consistent efforts and change, scaffolding has to stay in place longer than you think. And we're going to celebrate accomplishments towards achieving any goals by validating, encouraging, and noticing what we see happening. And that's partially why that weekly meeting is so important. It can be 5 minutes, it can be 15 minutes, but it's a time when we come together and we say, how are we doing on our plan to improve this one thing? So what are some potential obstacles? So many kids with ADHD and learning disabilities have a deep-seated sense of shame about having ADHD or being different from their peers. And this shame can start early in life and continue into adulthood. Sometimes the shame is obvious. Maybe your daughter doesn't make friends easily or write as well as her peers or spaces out at her desk. Sometimes it might be more hidden. Your son boasts about his accomplishments in video games and basketball, but hides his tests from you or under the bed or procrastinates before doing his homework endlessly. These are kids who expect to hear negative comments about themselves. And at some level, they may believe that it's easier not to try and fail than to try and fail. So they're struggling with low self-esteem. So let's do our second poll. How often does your child experience anxiety?
All right, I'm taking a look at the results as they come in. So it looks like we have about a third most of the time, 45% some of the time, and then the rest is split between occasionally and very few said rarely.
So we have a third and 45%. So that's like 75% of the time.
The vast majority, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So we know that anxiety affects learning, and anxiety disorders are problems based on fears and worries. They differ based on the focus of a person's worry, and anxiety is all about safety and security. It wants to make uncomfortable feelings and uncertainty go away immediately. Anxiety is experienced cognitively and physically. Worried thoughts foster anxiety in the body. Anxiety reflects all or nothing thinking and a negative expectancy. It's an I can't versus let's try and see what happens. Um, so what do we see with anxiety? We see catastrophizing. We see endless what if thoughts and worries, interpreting predictions as facts, reduced self-confidence and increased depression. Untreated anxiety, it leads to depression. Anxiety supports procrastination and it increases overwhelm. So what are some things that we can do to try to reduce anxiety? We can rely on probability. This is a very fact-based generation. They like probability. They like numbers. Mindfulness can be helpful, that kind of awareness, that self-evaluation. But mindfulness only works if you practice what baseline is like. So you have to actually do breathing activities regularly so that kids know what settled feels like. Otherwise, when they're upset and you want them to take a few deep breaths, they're going to hyperventilate. So this is something to maybe practice before you sit down at the dinner, and everyone's going to take a deep breath in, hold it for 4, breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 6. Maybe do that twice to really arrive at the meal. With worst case scenarios, we kind of want to follow those to the end of the line. So what would happen and how would that look? And what would you do if that happened? And could you handle that? Because a lot of times worst case scenarios are get to a place of absurdity that kids can actually see pretty quickly, and they're laughing or you're laughing, or they sometimes get to a place of, well, then the shark would eat me and I'd be dead, so who cares anyway? It's like, okay, then you're eaten by the shark. Story is over. So that's one way to go. Can you live with that? What else? What would happen next? Can you live with that? Another way to go is a best case scenario. What could go right? What about asking our kids what could go right? What might you enjoy at that first soccer practice where you don't know anyone? What's something that could be fun? And of course, we want to set up routines that support a sense of personal control over what's happening in life. Anxiety shows us that someone is feeling out of control. It's the reaction to the worry, not eliminating it, that makes the difference. We're never going to eliminate anxiety because we're wired for it. It's how we've survived. We want to zoom out and see how somebody's anxiety is operating and talking to them instead of reacting to its fearful demands. So how are we going to do this? We're going to identify those bodily signals. Kieran, age 16, says, even when I know the emotion is unjustified, I usually can't get rid of it without some other emotional distraction. So he knows what helps him, which is, I need some distraction. I need to listen to something on my phone, or I need to go jump on the trampoline, or whatever it is, that he has to do something else. So what we want to do is identify the bodily signals that anger or anxiety is present, and then look at the goal, right? A lot of times people who are anxious think about what they don't want. They don't think about what they do want. I want to make a friend, so I'm willing to say hello to someone on the playground. So we want to teach different kinds of coping skills, and we want to change people's relationship to anxiety by naming the anxiety as something that's, a thing rather than who they are. So, whether that anxiety is pouty Patty, or worried Walter, or stupid Steve, there's a name and there's a association with it. And then there's another part that's the counter to that. And that might be smart Steve, or wonderful Walter, or something like that. And so instead of pretending that anxiety is not going to happen, we're going to expect to worry in situations, and we're going to normalize it. So we're going to say, of course you're worried. Worried says blah, 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 and you can't handle it. You've not done this before. It makes sense that you're nervous. Anybody would be nervous. Anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of the resources to deal with it. So what are some tools? We went over some of these tools to address worry. Instead of minimizing and reassuring, we are going to validate. Minimizing is, oh, it's not that big a deal. Reassuring, you'll be fine. You don't know those things. It's a big deal. And when your child is telling you something is a big deal to them and you're saying it's not a big deal, you're diminishing them in that moment and they feel that and the anxiety likes that and it's going to get bigger. So instead, we want to say, you're right to be scared. You're not sure you can handle X. It's natural to worry in that situation. Reassurance does not develop the capacity for tolerating disappointment and learning how to talk to yourself bravely. This is what we want to develop for our kids, because anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of the resources to deal with it. So we're going to assess the size of the worry. Is this a catastrophe? Are they catastrophizing? We're going to look at the facts of a situation. What's that probability? We're going to look at the worst and best case options. Find and apply appropriate resources. What tools or people could assist you? If you need help, where could you find it? What have you done in the past in a similar situation that could help you here? And how are you going to reassure yourself? What phrases can you use to talk back to that loud worry voice in your mind? So what are some key takeaways about executive functioning skills and social emotional skills? Scaffolding isn't about making excuses. It's about facilitating learning and making adjustments for executive functioning challenges. There are things kids can do, somewhere within reach, and some they can't reach yet at all. That's okay. That's common. Let's work on what they can do and what's within reach, and those things that are above, way above, we're not going to move those down until something that's within reach has become a regular skill. We're going to do more of what works by focusing on one area of improvement together. We're going to model adaptation and flexibility. And we're going to ignore pushback by putting on our Teflon suits and using humor. I used to torture my middle school daughter by when she was fresh with me, I would, and she would mouth off, I would say, fresh is for vegetables, fresh is for vegetables. And she'd be like, oh, I hate you. You're the worst. And I'm like, yes, fresh is for vegetables. I just, eventually we'd start laughing. Or I'd put on, there was a song when she was in middle high school, that song Happy by Pharrell. And I'd put that on because we're happy. Here we are, middle school, happy. You don't like me ever. It's happy. And it was just, we were playing, right? Anxiety hates playing. Our kids are negotiating for power as they're trying to figure out who they are. And they don't necessarily want help or feedback. Janice, age 18, says, when I was younger in 9th grade, I didn't want any help. I wanted to deal with things on my own. I was a cocky kid. But now I know that even though you're independent, you need help sometimes. You can't always do it on your own. So we're going to nurture growth mindsets by really tending to resilience. Resilience is the antidote for shame, anxiety, and low self-confidence. We're going to build resilience by helping our kids tolerate the discomfort of not knowing, being unsure, and feeling disappointed, because that's how they're going to learn how to bounce back from things. Think about yourself. Have you learned how to be disappointed in life? Did you go through a time where things didn't work out for you, where you may have felt that it was uncertain and scary? It made you be part of who you are. So resilient people bounce back when problems arise. They don't blame themselves or others. They ask, what could I do differently? And these kinds of questions foster a mentality that taking risks is okay, even if there's worry about the embarrassment of the outcome. This is what a growth mindset is all about. Students with a growth mindset understand that they can get smarter through hard work, the use of effective strategies, and help from others when needed. So we're going to focus on islands of competency, things that your children love to do, that they're good at, that they feel proud of. Find something, whatever that is, and fertilize it. We're going to identify charismatic adults. That's not Beyonce or Taylor Swift. It's actually Stacey Daniels, and it's Renee, and it's the teachers that your kids come in contact with, and the coaches, and people who believe in them, who like them, who care about them. And we're going to nurture that mindset that it's okay to take a risk, to stumble, to regroup, try something different, try something again, figure out a new way of doing it. All of these things are how we learn from our living. And this is what it's all about. So we're going to acknowledge vulnerabilities as areas for improvement. And we're going to remember that anxiety and depression are very talented at erasing memories of courage and triumph. So I hope that you'll stay connected with me. I'm going to put in the chat here again, the free downloadable. We want to remember that kids who are resilient believe in a purpose to their lives. They feel that they matter. You can also get this downloadable through scanning, I think, the QR code. I'm hoping that it's working. And now I'm going to turn it over to Stacy, and I welcome your questions. It's been great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saline. Thank you. We have just 3 or 4 minutes for some questions. I'm just going to read.
Are we going till 8:30?
No, just just a few more minutes. So I'll ask you some parent questions, and we can just go for it and take other ones later. No problem.
I'm very sorry. I thought we were going from, I had on my calendar 7 to 8:30. So I apologize.
No,
Well, I'll stay on. I'm happy.
It's been great.
Stacy, I'm happy to stay on till 8:30 if people want to stay.
How do we as parents educate teachers to become more aware of the 5 C's and who believe in growth mindset and helping kids in reality to meet kids where they are? And we know at Carroll, right, we have a kind of heightened awareness of these things. We focus heavily on compassion and building confidence. But how do you build growth mindsets into educators and parents more globally?
Well, I think that's a really good question, because in order to build a growth mindset into a parent or an educator, they actually have to have one. Right. I'm just looking here that a lot of the calendar invites say till 8:30. So I'm going to stay on. And if you have to leave, that's fine. Thank you. Please make sure you get your free downloadable. And thank you for joining. So in order for people to nurture a growth mindset, you have to understand what it is, and you actually have to try to live it yourself. Now, I'm not perfect. I sometimes wish I was. That perfection is one of my challenges. But I also realize that perfectionism is part of a fixed mindset. This is the way it is. It has to be a particular, it has to turn out in a certain form, or it has to, there's no mistakes and things like that. When in reality, actually, there is no such thing as perfection. And the part of your brain that's telling you there is a part of that it is a real thing is also imperfect. So we want to nurture growth mindsets in our educators by letting them know they don't have to be perfect, that they're supposed to try something and stumble and take a risk and see how it works.
Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could talk more about the concept of shame. Many of our kids who come to Carroll have known school failure and have been shamed by educators, and as a result, feel a lot of shame themselves and have low confidence. If you could talk about that some more.
Yeah, so, because learning disabilities and ADHD are often inherited because they're neurological conditions, many parents who come to a school like Carroll have their own educational trauma. So they have this invisible backpack that they bring with them of the ways in which their own education didn't serve them or actually hurt them. And they want to protect their kids from that. And so they have shame about the ways in which maybe their brains were uniquely wired, and they don't want their kids to feel ashamed at all. And we can't control our children's emotional reactions to things. We cannot, but we can set them up by creating building blocks of self-esteem. And the way that we do that for ourselves as parents is by practicing self-compassion. So radical self-acceptance. I, Sharon, am somebody who is intense, and I have strong emotions, and I can be impatient, particularly with myself. So that's something that I need to be aware of, because I don't want that to bring that to my children. And guess what? As a parent, I did sometimes. I was impatient with my children, or I lost my temper. Can I change that and go back? I wish I could, but instead I can try to be different now. I can certainly be accountable for the ways that I did things. So accountability, ownership of ways that you're stumbling or struggling can be helpful. Having, when you live in a neurodivergent family, everybody has struggles. They may not be the strange struggles, but we're all working on something. And that can be a great crucible to grow up in, to know, well, my dad had a problem with being late, but he really was trying to work on it. And when he made it to my soccer game on time, I always gave him a high five because I was so proud of him. I know how hard that was for him. And he knows how hard it is for me to pick up my room. And so he sits with me, and I'll just give him things, and we'll decide, well, this goes in the hamper, or I can fold this so I'm not alone. So we're doing this. And this is true for educators too. A lot of people go into education because they're fixers, they're helpers, they're do-gooders. And so when you hit the challenges of working with students whose brains are wired maybe differently than yours, or you're struggling to really connect with them, you can feel frustrated and like a failure, when in reality, you're just doing the best that you can with the tools you have available, just like we all are.
So, you kind of alluded to something, as parents, we all have those oops moments where we kind of lose ourselves. We're less than perfect. What do you do in a like bad parenting moment? How do you come back from that?
Hmm. Well, my children could give you a whole lesson on the many times I did that, particularly my second child, because we kind of went up against it. How do you come back from that? Um, well, I think that's part of why I got into, I wrote this book, and it's part of why I created the 5 C's. I think that the way that you come back from that is by being genuine. Pretending that something didn't happen is actually not fair to you, and it's definitely not fair to your child. So what we want to do is to say, you know what? I said something I regret. So one of the things that I talk about in my book is take back of the day, so that everyone in the family can have a take back of the day. I said something that I wish I hadn't. I'd like permission to take that back. Or I'm gonna make an amends. I yelled at you. It wasn't okay that I yelled at you. I'm truly sorry for doing that. What do we need to do to move forward? And your kids may say, nothing. I yell at you all the time, whatever. Or they might say, I'd really like it if we could, if you'd make my favorite, ravioli for dinner. That would be really cool. So we want to really be open about it. But we don't want to be apologizing all the time either. It's like, we made a mistake. I'm going to own it. I'm going to be accountable, and I'm going to try to change it. So the thing that doesn't work is the kind of the boy who cries wolf scenario. Oh, I did that again. Oh, I did that again. Oh, I did that again, but I'm not trying to change it. So I'm working on it. So just like your child is working on something, you could be working on something, and you could be helping each other out.
That's really, really helpful. Another question in there too, embedded, is how do you manage a power struggle?
I'm laughing. How long do I have? Okay. So I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about the type of power struggle. What is a power struggle? A power struggle says I, child, feel like I don't have a say, that I can't get what I want. I really need to get what I want. And in order for me to be happy. And so the challenge for a parent is to be able to say, I'm sorry that you're disappointed. I know it's hard not to get what you want, but this is the way we agreed, or this is how we do things. And that's what I'm sticking with. I think a lot of parents want to be their child's friend. And I'll say from my side of parenting, my kids are 29 and 25, and I have 3 grandchildren. I'm not my children's friends. I'm their mother. And, one of them bought me a little like embroidered pillow that says, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. And um, so, which was kind of funny. I think that's pretty hilarious. But power struggles are about me as an adult needing to be right. It's about me needing to tell you that you're wrong, or it's about me needing to assert my authority. And the question that I would want to ask, in that situation is, how do you need to do that? Why do you need to do that? And right now, like, because if you're in a power struggle, then you're already beyond the stop, think, act, recover model, because you haven't stopped. When your kids are pushing you to the edge, what they're saying is, I feel out of control. I want something that's going to help me feel better. And this thing is that you're going to do is going to do it for me. And what we need to say as parents is, I can see that you're frustrated. I can see that you really believe that this thing is what's going to make the difference. But I'm feeling too much pressure to make that decision right now, and I'm not going to do that. I need more time. You can always buy time. I will tell you that my second child, who is neurodivergent, acted out way more than my first child. And when they were in 9th grade, they liked to go to some parties, and we got a call one night from a party at midnight that the police had come, and my daughter had exceeded the legal limit for alcohol consumption, and would I please come pick her and her friend up? Okay, because that was the agreement we had. Anytime we got a call to pick you up, we would pick you up, no questions asked at that time. So went, picked them up, brought them home, stayed up with them till 1:30 in the morning, vomiting in the bathroom. It was a great evening for me. And the next day, they woke up. My child is a they. So they woke up and they're like, so what's going to happen to me? And I said, you don't look so good. It was a bad night. I don't think we're going to talk about this today. We'll talk about it tomorrow. You can think about what you'd like to see happen, and Dad and I will talk about it. We'll think about it, and we'll come back tomorrow when we're all doing a little better. That was very uncomfortable for them. They wanted to know right away.
Yeah.
But we weren't doing that. And we waited. And the next day we sat down and we said, so what do you think? And they said, well, I don't think I should go to parties for a while. Okay, we said, how long? About 3 months. That sounds good to us. Anything else? Yeah, maybe no sleepovers for a while. How long? Like a month. Okay. When you do have a sleepover, though, after that, know that we will be home. Always. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. We'd like to see you pick up, do a little more on the chore department. And we gave them a couple extra chores. And that's where it ended.
That's the 5 C's in practice right there.
That is the 5 C's in practice. That is one of my proudest parenting moments. I have to. I'm not going to tell you the bad ones. I mean, I can tell you a bad one if you want, but you know, that same year before I got to the prouder moment, it was New Year's Eve, and they came downstairs with like a t-shirt and like a thin fake leather jacket. And I also live in Massachusetts, and it was 20 degrees. And I was like, you're not going outside wearing that because you get upper respiratory colds all the time. And then I get them, and that's not okay with me. So you're not wearing that. And there was a whole battle, and literally I was blocking the door with my body, yelling, "You're not going outside without a coat." That was not one of my better moments, but I did win because they put a coat on and then they said, "I'm not wearing a hat." And they left.
I have kind of a granular question for you. There's a
I
parent.
hope people are laughing. I can't see
Yeah,
anybody's
yeah.
reaction, but I hope you're all laughing.
I'm just going to ask like 2 small questions and then we'll.
Sure.
What is the difference between genetic susceptibility and a predisposition? That was a parent question.
Good question. So a predisposition is leaning towards something. So, anxiety might run in your family. Genetic susceptibility we find more with depression because there's an inherited trait that has been found in depression that we don't necessarily see, that inherited trait with anxiety, but we see tendencies. So that's what that means. And somebody said yes, laughing. Thank you. Thank goodness. I'm glad you're laughing.
Yes.
I also want to say to Marguerite, thank you. I do not have a book on anxiety, but I have a lot of resources on my website that are free. And I'm currently writing a book on anxiety in adults with ADHD. So
I'll give you this one last question and then
sure. Or we can take 2 more. It's fine.
I think it's good. Thank you so much. One parent wrote, I heard you recently speak on a podcast called Tilt Parenting. So you have fans. And you discussed how ADHD presents differently in girls. Can you share a little bit about this with the audience?
Of course, I would love to. We had so much to cover that I had to sort of weed things out because I wanted to make sure that there was time for Q&A. So there are, as I said, there are 3 types of ADHD. Mostly what we see is hyperactive, impulsive, and inattentive. And so typically ADHD, the face of ADHD has been a Caucasian boy. Okay, and that Caucasian boy has been a boy who's hyperactive and impulsive, fidgeting, moving around, talking a lot, interrupting, restless, a little bit aggressive. And those kids, those boys, are flagged sooner and earlier than anybody else. Okay. Then we have attentive girls and boys who are flagged later because they're not calling as much attention to themselves. And so inattentive boys may have some aspects of combined types. So we might see impulsivity, that the both behavioral in terms of, keep their body in space, but we also might see them, spacing out in ways that are really sort of problematic in a classroom, such as, the teacher has to call on them several times. So they'll be flagged too, although the chances of that being missed are pretty much as high as it is for girls with ADHD. And so what we see with girls with ADHD who are inattentive is something else. And the one thing that I want to say is that because of how girls and boys are socialized differently, many girls are internalizers. So even boys who are inattentive will still externalize some of their distress so that teachers and other adults will pick it up, right? But girls will internalize. And so what happens is they're flying under the radar, and they fly under the radar longer because if they're smart, and this is true for intelligent boys and girls, their intelligence compensates for their weaker executive functioning skills until the pressure on those skills is great enough that it doesn't, their coping strategies aren't working anymore. So what we see a lot with girls who have ADHD is that they're not drawing as much attention to themselves, and they're doing okay enough socially and academically. Interestingly, what we find is that a lot of girls with ADHD do not get along so well with neurotypical girls because they miss all kinds of verbal social cues and nonverbal cues that are, sort of uh, um, intrinsically part of how girls relate to each other. And so a lot of these girls actually get along better with neurotypical boys or even neurodivergent boys because the way that boys interact, there's sort of it's a little bit it's less nuanced, and so that they can kind of keep up and stick with them. One of the things that we're finding for girls with ADHD is that there are certain points along the educational process when their ADHD becomes more noticeable. It might be a transitioning to middle school when suddenly they have to manage more of their stuff independently, and or when they transition to high school, and then also when they transition to college. A lot of emerging adults, particularly females, come to me and they say, I can do school and I can do life, but when I got to college, I had to do school and life, and I couldn't do both of those things at the same time. So there's this sense of overwhelm that they hide, and that can be then seen in referrals for anxiety or depression.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And the last question.
You know what? I think any parting words of wisdom for us? How about let's do a last word like that.
I'm gonna see if there's a let's see. Let's see. How do you? We didn't talk very much about homework. Do you want to say something about homework at all? Maybe I should say something about homework. So your kids' homework is theirs. It's not yours. And in order to have a successful homework period, I really want to encourage you to use family work time, even for those teenagers who insist they want to work in their room. Doesn't always happen that way, right? Things don't always occur because you're not there. I had one client who would have his kids sit at the same seat at the table every night with the computer reflecting in the window behind him so he could see if he was actually doing the homework or on YouTube. And so, we want to have homework be something that is not just a singular burden, but something that as a family we're working on. And that means the order of the work, the type of the work, the length of the study periods, breaks, and to avoid the homework hassle, to keep boundaries around the homework. I am sure that the Carroll School does not want you staying up for 3 hours fighting with your kids about the homework. If you're having a difficult time with homework in your family, please talk to the school because they want to work with you. The idea is not to torture everybody. The idea is to learn something. And if, learning means you do 2 math problems instead of 7, then maybe that's what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us tonight from the West Coast. You still get to have a night. We're sort of at the tail end of ours. Thank you, parents, for joining us. And any questions we didn't get to, we'll be sure to get back to you on email. I hope you have a wonderful evening and enjoy the upcoming weekend. Take care, everyone.